Welcome to the digital airways of Storyophonic as we initiate Season 6 of our ongoing conversation series. We're proud to introduce you to the members of a very special community, those in the spotlight and behind the scenes, the people and the personalities who make the music happen. I'm Dan Kimpel. We're proud to continue with our mission to entertain and inform you as we reveal tips and tales from deep inside the music industry. In Hollywood circles, his surname is synonymous with music, and Denny Tedesco has certainly distinguished himself as a filmmaker about music. His newest feature, The Immediate Family, is the story of the eminent circle of players who recorded and toured with artists including James Taylor, Jackson Browne, Linda Ronstadt, Joni Mitchell, Carole King, and Don Henley. Like Denny's previous feature, The Wrecking Crew, dedicated to his father, the legendary studio guitarist Tommy Tedesco, Immediate Family illuminates the musical kinship of a magical era. Denny Tedesco is our guest on Storyophonic. Hello, Storyophonic Universe. It's a beautiful day here in Valley Glen, California, and we are just a step away from Hollywood, and we're here with Denny Tedesco, a filmmaker extraordinaire, and we're going to be talking about his new film, Immediate Family. Welcome, Denny.
Thank you. And by the way, this is my old stomping ground because I went to Notre Dame High School around the corner in Sherman Oaks, so I know this area.
Did you cut school and go smoke cigarettes and things?
Yeah, it's funny. It's 1979. No, I did not cut school, but I was student body president, but I'm proud to say we were the first pot-smoking cabinet. So.
And with that, we roll on.
Yeah.
Denny, in crafting the narrative for The Immediate Family, there's so many stories. How did you decide which story to tell?
Oh, God. I mean, it's funny because the beginning when I think we were talking about before we got on, when Lisa Roy, who brought the project to my producers, said, would you be interested in this idea? I'm like, oh, my God, that's right up my alley. Because, after doing The Wrecking Crew, which was the story about my father and the 60s session musicians, that took 19 years. So coming into another project about musicians, I was shell-shocked. And the first one seriously took me down. Did everything you're not supposed to do, which is basically use your credit card. But when it came up to do this other film, I thought, this is my wheelhouse. I understand this. And we met the band, and instantly they all jumped on it. And the next day they said Carole King can be interviewed in 3 weeks. And I went, oh, Christ, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Because I had a pitch, but, I don't know the story, really. I'm pitching broad ideas. And I know of the guys. To me, they're all legends. I knew Leland personally, I ran into him a lot of times. But all these other guys were legends to me. So all I knew was, what they kind of did. And I only have 3 weeks to figure this out. And so once we started, I kind of learned on the job. I did reading my books and this and that for 3 weeks. And then all of a sudden within, I think 2 months, I had Linda, Carole, Jackson Browne, James Taylor, that was Linda Ronstadt, Phil Collins, Lou Adler, Billy Bob Thornton, and a couple more, all within a couple months, 3 months. I actually hadn't even filmed the guys yet, but everybody was jumping on. And people ask, was it hard to get these stars? Never had it easier. Because the love of these guys was phenomenal. One call, not me. I'm not making the call. Someone else is making the call, either Danny or Waddy or whoever's making the calls. Instantly, yeah, when, dum. That was it. And that showed, literally, it was so crazy. So you start building on this, and you kind of like, again, you do some research, you try to do as much as you can, as you know, and then someone says something, you go, oh, I didn't know that, which is most of the time. And then you kind of come off of that, and hopefully the next interview you can jump off of something that, James said. James Taylor told me about the plane crash. So the next time I interviewed one of the guys, I said, "Hey, what about that plane crash?" I would never have been able to do one or the other. You got to, hopefully, it's in the right order. So, because you're never going back to James.
Gotcha. Our previous guest, we've been fortunate to have Leland Sklar with us, Danny Korchmar, and Peter Asher. Peter Asher was early on in one of our first ones. We did a remote. We had to carry microphones into Hans Zimmer's studio. They didn't have microphones, right? But we had those. Peter Asher is one of the easiest interviews I've ever done because he's got all this stuff on his walls. You just look at something, a picture of Time magazine, and ask him about it. And he's very gracious. It's very interesting how he, as you say in the Immediate Family film, was kind of like a linchpin.
Oh, God.
In all
if
this.
you take Peter Asher out, you just say Peter Asher was never born. The 70s change, totally change. You might not have James Taylor. For the people that haven't seen the film or don't know the story, Danny and James kind of, they grew up different places, but they would hook up in the summers in the Cape, in Boston area that way. And they were all kids 2 years apart, and they're playing music. They, relate to each other, and it's Cooch and James, and they're da-da-da-da. And all of a sudden they have a band in New York called The Flying Machine. And, that lasts for about a year. And, James is going through his issues with all the drugs and all that stuff. And so James decides to go to London to get away from everything. And Danny says, "Why don't you hook up with my friend Peter Asher," who basically I knew. He goes, because I met Peter when he was doing Peter and Gordon, and we were the backup band. My band at the time was a backup band a few years ago. Doesn't know anything. He hasn't talked to Peter in a long time at this point, but here's his number. Blindly, James goes, calls him, and hooks up with him, not knowing that Peter's just been given the job to run Apple Records, and they're looking for their first artist. And Peter said, "I went through thousands of tapes, because they wanted to be really raw. They did want it to be like anybody, and I think that was what I read somewhere, was, hey, if you got a chance, send your tape. Everybody's got it." And James walks in and he says, "Oh, what do you do?" He's on the singer-songwriter. "Oh, what do you got?" He starts, playing and showing him the tapes. He goes, "Would you like a contract?" And James Taylor becomes the first Apple Records contract. So you take that out. Different.
None of it happens.
And then he brings him to L.A., and hooks him up with Warner Brothers, and then he goes with Linda Ronstadt and all those other producing gigs. He brings artists to the top. I mean, it's crazy.
It's a great story, and it's beautifully told. And Peter Asher is such an eloquent storyteller as well in the film.
And if you wrote that, and I always think of that, if you wrote that in a script, it's so bad.
There's no way.
Knock on the door and, the publishing company or whatever. And, "Yeah, we love what you do. Come on in, kid."
Like a Mickey Rooney film.
Exactly.
How funny. One of the things that we think about Peter Asher in context of the Immediate Family. Now, you mentioned the Wrecking Crew, and I talk about that in our intro as well. The Wrecking Crew were not credited musicians. And,
most of the time they were.
A lot of the time. And when I was growing up, I'm from that era, I had no idea that wasn't the Byrds playing on the Byrds records or all the other things. Peter Asher, in some ways, is given credit for putting the names of the players. And of course, by now, we're not in the singles world anymore. We're in LPs. We've got that.
Yeah, and and that's funny because most of if we had album credits in the 60s or 50s, it was because they were jazz albums.
Good.
Because there was respect to those musicians. Once the singles come out, there's no one's getting credit, which is understandable. And in the early days of rock and roll, or not in rock and roll, but in L.A., if you did a single or two singles and they become hits, okay, let's put an album together.
Yeah.
And they quickly throw an album together. It might be two songs that they're featuring, but the rest of them are covers. And that was a big difference. In those days, it was a factory here. The reason the Wrecking Crew was so important is because labels didn't trust the bands that were with these artists. They weren't that good. They were kids, or they didn't have the studio chops. And, don't forget, in the early 60s, only one track. Yeah. You're mono. So and there's like Glenn Campbell said, he goes, you got 15, 20 people in the room. No one can make a mistake. And he goes, everybody in the room was a Michael Jordan. Because if you make a mistake, you're going back to start again because you can't, you're not computer, you're not plugging in, you're not popping in on bar 32. Let's go back to the beginning. It's faster. And in 3 hours, you better knock out your 3 songs you needed to do because everybody's leaving because you got another gig at Universal or another gig at Gold Star, whatever. It's boom, 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 boom. Lou Adler gave credits. He does Mamas and Papas. He's given credits. He's given credits in Jan and Dean. Mm-hmm. So he was one of the few that I remember on the LPs. But like you said, then Peter Asher comes, the business change. Radio changes. FM starts in the late 60s. That changes everything because now you could do longer cuts. Singer-songwriters are writing differently or whatever. They're sequencing albums. Now LPs become a medium that everybody's buying. It became more than just, it's just a bunch of songs on the album. Tapestry was a thought-out album by Carole, and Lou. Meaning like, Carole wrote everything, but Lou was sequencing and, what I mean? That's when you started thinking about albums as something different.
There's a comment in both The Wrecking Crew and also The Immediate Family that is similar. And it has to be that these musicians were in the right place at the right
Absolutely.
time.
I think all of us. I mean, I think that goes for everybody.
Yeah.
Where'd you meet your wife? Well, she just happened to be on the bus. I always think of that. I think it's always the right place at the right time. But I always think part of it's luck. But if you're not going to try, you're never going to have that luck.
Yeah.
If you don't go out and do it, But you're right about it. And I think the appreciation of what these musicians, how successful they were and what they did, they're very humble and they understand because there's always someone that's the greatest guitar player. Boy, I always remember my father go, man, that guy's a bitch. That was the greatest compliment ever. You know what I mean? And a musician understands that. Musicians appreciate musicians. As much as they're wacky, and I could say that because I'm a son of a musician, but there might be jealousy and stuff, but not really because there's something about you guys that are always looking to go, oh my God, you should hear so-and-so. Oh my God, you hear that album? It's an art that they appreciate each other.
There's an insularity sometimes of musicians. It's interesting. As I mentioned, I had interviewed Danny Kortchmar.
Yeah.
And the point at which he loosened up with me was when I referenced both he and James Taylor were fans of Joseph Spence,
right,
a Bahamian guitar player. When I said that, you could see Kortchmar kind of like, oh, okay. It's always important to come from the inside with musicians, and I think that's a neat thing. The Wrecking Crew, they had to be chameleons, because they were playing behind so many different types of artists, Danny Kortchmar in The Immediate Family makes the point that the musicians were called to play themselves.
Yeah.
That's key.
It's funny because here's the thing about studio musicians. In the 50s, you were the guys that were doing the big band stuff or the movie stuff. I'm just thinking about L.A. You had the Bob Baines or Johnny Greens and the guitar players or those guys. And then the 60s, when the rock and roll thing starts coming around, the Wrecking Crew, and the reason they were called the Wrecking Crew supposedly was because the old guys said they're going to wreck the business playing this rock and roll shit. Well, my father comes in 1960, meaning like he's working a lot. He's 30 years old. But he's willing to play those 3 chords because he doesn't give a shit. I'm getting paid for play anything. Oh my God, He comes out of Niagara Falls as working in a chemical factory. He does, and I asked my mom, I said, was he playing a lot? She goes, there's no work in Niagara Falls in 1953. He's not for a guitar player. So he's happy to be 7 years later, my God, I'm getting money for this. So he had no feeling of being snob or whatever. He hated the music sometimes, but he was happy to make a living. So those guys, when they're doing the records, there's a lot of looseness, meaning you could do whatever you can do to make the song better. You're always doing this. But those guys had a 3-hour session. They didn't have a lot of time. You're knocking this out. You got 2-3 songs you got to knock out in that time period. The 70s loosen up. Now they're taking weeks at a time. And I remember Earl Palmer, the great drummer of, the Wrecking Crew in so many eras, said in the 60s they were recording dates. In the 70s they were projects, and that's a big difference. Yeah. Danny and Leland and Russ and Waddy, they had opportunity to contribute more because they're hanging at the studio and playing. Now, there's the other guys like a Dean Parks who can do it all as well. Dean can do the mandolin, the gut string, da-da-da-da-da-da, like when Dad was. That was their era. And they would have to play, we're going to do, they'd have to sound like this or they sound like this because they're doing movie calls or records, but, they had an idea what they had to do. Waddy, you want Waddy for Waddy. Yeah. Don't waste him. He's not going to do the reading part. If you're going to put a bunch of reading in there, it's not going to be Waddy. Not that Waddy can't read, but you know what I mean? Yeah. You bring a specialist in for that. There's a great story that Don Randy was told by Dwayne Eddy. He goes, do you remember, I don't know if it was around when you were here, there was a guitar store called Valley Arts Guitar. Yeah. It was in the 70s and 80s, and it was like the guitar store in Studio City everybody went to, all the guys, Rittenauer, Dad, all the players. And Dad's in there, he said, holding court in a corner, talking to some kids or whatever, just hanging. And he sees Dwayne on the other side of the store. And he goes and yells out, "Hey, Dwayne!" And Dwayne's very quiet. "Hey, Tommy, how's it going?" "Good. I got a question for you." "What?" "Has anybody ever asked you to sound like Tommy Tedesco?" And it's exactly what Danny Kochmar's saying. Mm-hmm. He didn't have to sound like Dwayne Eddy. He didn't. They were asking Danny or Waddy to sound like themselves because they were bringing something to that date.
The point comes up in the Immediate Family. They also wanted players who think like producers as well.
I think any good player will do that.
Yeah.
My father always said, "I'm playing for smiles. If the guy's not smiling or she's not smiling, I'm doing something wrong. So I better play until they smile. So if I play what I think is right, if they don't like it, well, I got to change it up. If they want me to dumb it down, I'll dumb it down. If they don't want me to play so good, that, I'll do that." But as producers, you try your best, I think, to make the sound or the song pop. You play something, like Waddy was saying. He goes, a lot of times I'd be doing something and they didn't want him to play solos. No, just play and he would still play the solo when that solo time came. And that is sticking your neck out. But you know what? That's what will get you the next gig. And that's what stands out.
Making up the arrangements. Earl Palmer talked about that in The Wrecking Crew. Also Immediate Family. I think the quote is, "They put notes on paper, that's not music. You
have to make
the music." Which is really interesting. Both films use a device that I really like. You isolate the players playing their parts, and then you segue it into the track.
That came from early days of Wrecking Crew when I was trying to cut something. Carole King is the only one that had a bass in her hand. Dad's pretty much gone. He's passed on and only had Hal. And Hal, I said, well, what am I going to do? And so I thought, well, if I put him in the studio, wait a minute, if I put him in the studio, put headphones on, this is exactly what he would have done anyways. He would have been hearing a track, so let's do it that way. And then I'll mix. That came out of necessity. So once it worked the first time, I can do it the second time. And it was so much fun to do it on this one because it's funny because I had to convince, a couple people. It's like, just shut up and do it. Not the players. I said, this is what we're doing, and this is how we're doing it. And I don't think the players had an idea until now what I was doing. Mm-hmm. It's hard to explain. To me, it's so simple. But until you see it work and it's go, oh my God. If you're in the studio watching a drummer play, you don't know what he's playing unless you're hearing the track. That's right. And there's nothing better, and that's how I always heard things. I always hear the guitar lick going. I'll hear, I can't hear a lyric, by the way, to save my life. Happy Birthdays is a stretch for me. But I do, seriously, it's fun to isolate that. Yeah. And it's been, I'll do it on the next one too.
Good,
Yeah.
good. I like the animation. It lightens everything up.
Absolutely.
When that happens, it just brightens it.
Yeah.
It lightens it up. It reminds us that we're watching entertainment. We should be
Thank you.
entertained by.
And that was exactly what it was
Yeah.
supposed to do. When I did the original, The Wrecking Crew, by the way, that wasn't supposed to be about my father. It was another thing where things change in the edit. After 20 minutes, someone said, "Hey, why are you cutting this film like this?" I said, "What do you mean?" He goes, "You're not putting your storyline in this." I said, "I don't want it to be known that the director is the son of the guitar player." He says, "Yeah, but you have something that no one else, any one of us editors or directors in this building, we can't do what you can do." And all right. And I did it, and it worked. What it helped me was that changed the focus of the film. I could go to humor when I needed with my father because I knew his stuff. I had it. I was able to manipulate easier because then it was like it's the story of my father and his friends.
I also enjoyed the music supervision, like you mentioned about the score. There's a story, as you referenced, about the scary airplane flight.
Yeah.
Now that story ends with James Taylor's version of how sweet it is.
That's I
Make
have
you
so much,
laugh.
well, you know what's weird is I love, again, all this stuff is like I'm of that era, but not. Mm-hmm. I'm born in '61, so I'm 14 and 75, whatever it is. I know I know a lot of the songs. Sometimes it wasn't always the songs or the albums I was listening to.
Sure.
So when I'm looking for a song, I'm looking for, oh my God, that's perfect. How sweet it is, right? Now, what's weird is I'm also looking for the other song that goes before that, which is, I didn't pick it. I picked it because of the sound, not because of the title. And it's from the section, which is Danny and Leland and Durkee and Rush. And this is called Hamsters of Doom. Now, that was where I didn't pick the title, which is perfect. I picked the tone of what was going on. I said, "Oh, this is good. Put this one in." And then as we gave credits to all the songs as it was playing, so people might go, "Oh my God, what's that song from?" And went, "Hamsters of Doom." Oh my God, that works out perfectly. Not, what I mean? It was weird. It's not, There was another song that we had, when you're talking about supervision, where you cut things in and you fall in love with it and you haven't cleared it yet. And, or the editor puts something in and you get used to it. And one of them was Leather and Lace that was used in part of the film for way too long. And Stevie Nicks people said, "Hey, you got that in for 2.5 minutes. What are you doing?" Because it felt like we were taking advantage, which we were in a sense, but we were not thinking that way. It's just, you're making a film, you love the sound of it. And again, whatever. Okay, that's true. Let's find another one. And Jonathan, our producer, said, "What about the Carole King song off of Tapestry?" I went, "We haven't used that." I went, "Oh my God, that's perfect." And that's like an accident. Or not an accident, but something gets taken out, you kind of replace it.
Yeah.
We had one unfortunate song we had to lose was "Hurt So Bad," which is the Linda song that Little Anthony did originally, and it's Bobby Hart wrote it.
Yeah.
And it's a great song, and Danny plays a great solo on it. Here's the thing about this industry. Thank God 99.9% came through. The labels and the publishers, they don't have to give you anything.
That's right.
Everybody should understand that they don't owe you. You owe them in a weird way. Not a weird way, you do. And I have no problem with paying. I went to school because my father made a living as a musician. I went to college and he raised a family. And so the Wrecking Crew, everybody came through. 110 songs, I didn't put one out. And there were 100 of them you knew. All the publishers and the labels came together. And on this one, Mason Cooper was my supervisor, and he went after everybody, and he did a great job. And this one song, everybody's on Most Favored Nations, which means everybody's making the same amount. If it's 10 seconds or it's a minute, everybody's making the same amount, blah, blah, blah. So there's no, bullshit that goes on. So all of a sudden, Universal label clears it, no problem. Universal Publishing clears it, no problem. A small publisher only had 35%. Says, we want $3,000 more. It's like, really? I said, but I can't. I said, I literally can't. He said, well, it's worth more. I said, yeah, it's always worth more. Everything's worth more. But it's like, it's not possible because I have 85 songs. So that's over $240,000, which it's a documentary. We're barely in, it'll take a long time to make $240,000. It's going to take a long time. And it was like, and they were such jerks about it. And it was really bummed me out because that's the kind of stuff that I hate. I don't like, if I have kryptonite, my kryptonite is stupidity. People's stupidity. It's like, why are you doing that? It's not like you're making that every day.
Yeah.
All you're doing, and it would have been nice to have Bobby Hart's song in there. Yeah. And Danny's solo is great.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
So it kind of like bummed me out, and I had to do another song, and it was a Crosby, Stills and Nash song I put in there, which was cool. I like it now.
Yeah.
And I changed, I still use Danny's playing, but what I did is slowed it down, so you don't know. It's more of surreal. So I made a surreal 10 seconds of the players playing. And it follows up with Linda right after that in Luella. You just have to manipulate and just think out, how do I save something?
So much involved in this. You talk about, you're in an age where kind of a bridge between these generational things.
Yeah.
Steve Postel has a really interesting role in the film.
Very much
and he's
so.
kind of like that too. He's sort of like, because he's a little younger than the other guys.
He's the kid. He's 65.
Yeah. He's kind of a bridge, but sometimes in the movie, his observations seem to mirror maybe what the audience is experiencing. That
Absolutely.
was my thought. Yeah.
It's interesting because Steve, I give Steve a lot of credit because he doesn't get the credit that's due, but it's, hey, Steve's career is a different career, and we are featuring these four guys. But Immediate Family wouldn't be Immediate Family if Steve wasn't there, because I think Steve picks up a lot of slack where he keeps it going, But Steve comes from a totally, he's a multi-instrument, in terms of guitars and stuff. And I think his knowledge of all these guys as a producer, he understands a lot. And being that kid that grew up with these guys, I think one of the greatest lines in the movie that Steve says, he goes, I grew up learning. When I first went to go see James Taylor concert when I was like 12 or whatever it was, he goes, I realized, those other guys, that's what the rhythm section does, And he goes, that's where you need a good rhythm section, da-da-da-da-da. And Leland goes, thanks, Steve, we love you. And then there's a pause, he goes, and then Steve says, now I think differently.
It's so interesting that the Immediate Family toured. Now that's a huge difference between the Wrecking Crew and the Immediate Family. Was the fact that they went out on the road with the artists and played live,
absolutely, and that's why they become family. Don't forget Dad and those guys. Hal went on the road later in the 70s and 80s with John Denver.
Yeah.
But if you were in the studios in 1967 and you went on the road, you're not working.
Yeah.
The truth is, you're either coming in, you're a newbie, or you're not cutting it, because you had 3 or 4 dates lined up every day in 67. I mean, I saw my dad's workbook, and it's like phenomenal. And you realize they're making so much money on I don't know what they would have been making on the road in that time period, but it was a shitty gig.
Yeah.
If you were a road player, a road band, you were still cutting your teeth, and you might making what, $100, $200 a week. I don't know what it was, but don't forget, you're making $60 an hour in that era. So Dad could be making $500, a day.
Yeah.
Whatever it is. And so that era was like, and again, they're not going to go on the road. They don't need to, so they're moving fast. Now, when I interviewed Peter Asher, this is the change in my head. I said something to Peter, because I'm talking about them as legends. Because don't forget, Russ Kunkel's Put Russ Kunkel's 3 big albums in 71, 72. Tapestry, Carole King, Sweet Baby James, James Taylor, and Joni Mitchell's Blue. Take those 3, and you could stop your career. You go, wow, who did that?
Yeah.
But those were the beginning days of these guys. So they're spending time in the studios. Leland's never been in the studio. Well, he's done a little studio, not really. He hasn't done studio work until Mudslide Slim. That's his first album with James Taylor. And Danny's done some with Carole and other stuff, but they're not working session players. So when I said to, with Peter, I said, talking about them as legends, he goes, they weren't legends. They were our friends. They didn't have a lot going. At that point, they had things going. But once they did that, you did Tapestry and Sweet Baby James, now things open up. Now they're on the road with Sweet Baby James, and Carole is in the band as a backup. Not a backup, she's the pianist.
Yeah.
So she comes off the road and does Tapestry. Now she's staying home, So what I'm saying is their careers, they weren't so busy at that point in 71. Now they're doing the road gigs. Now there's that, like Leland says, in those days, the old guys said, why are you taking the road gig? You can't take a chance. You're going to lose work. Well, Leland said at that point also, they weren't ready for the studios maybe at this point.
Yeah.
I think Bob Glob said that too. He says, going on the road gave us time to learn because don't forget, we're still kids. So playing with these albums and supporting what they just recorded was a big difference. The business changed.
The section, as you mentioned, preceded the Immediate Family,
Yeah.
and that was a lot of the same players that became the Immediate Family, right?
Well,
without Waddy, right?
Without Waddy,
Yeah.
and it was basically Leland, Russ, Danny, and Craig Durkee. But they were the guys that was doing all the James Taylor, and I think James was the one that named it, and they were doing the road gigs. And once Carole got out of the group, that's when they brought Durkee in.
Yeah.
And so once they're doing all this stuff, and they would, like Leland said, he goes, they just wanted a jam. So they would do their sound checks, and, James do his, a couple of things, make sure everything's right, and walk away after a couple of songs. And these guys was still playing, and they're playing, rock, jazz, or whatever you want to call it, fusion, and having a good time. And that was Peter hit the record button on a cassette.
Somehow, a very unwieldy affixation happened where sometimes they would refer to them as a mellow mafia. I know.
It's funny.
It's so weird.
That was weird because I just heard about that recently.
Oh, I knew that phrase.
Yeah, and it's funny. It's like, oh, my research didn't pull that up for some reason.
Interesting. Yeah.
But I just heard about that, and I said,
it's so inept. I mean, sit down with Danny Korchmar for a second. See how mellow that is.
Oh God, don't do that. We'll show you mellow. Or Waddy. It's funny because I get it. I see where they're coming from. Yeah. It's funny because, again, there's an era of, we're talking about the next, the other things going on in town at this point, in the 70s.
Oh, yeah.
You got the Picaros and, doing Toto, and you got this going on, da-da-da-da. The singer-songwriter, you do Tapestry and James and Joni and all that. It's a bullshit calling them mellow mafia.
Yeah, I know.
You could say that about my father too, or just say mafia. No. Oh, I'm just kidding. He wasn't mafia. He knew mafia, but he was just no.
There you go. It's true. Sometimes, Denny, in the movie, the stories you choose not to tell are perceivable by some of us that are watching with a
curious. Tell me.
Okay.
Because it was funny because something came up recently. I want to hear what
the Werewolves of London story.
Okay.
61 takes, and they ended up using take 2.
Yeah.
The sun was coming up. They were still taking and taking. Now, Denny, we're aware that maybe we were in sessions that went on till the sun came up at that time, and sometimes there were other elements involved that were making them run as long as they were.
Oh, the drugs and stuff.
Oh yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Why don't you just say it?
Oh,
I didn't know where he was going with this.
Oh no. Yes.
It sounds like he's hiding it from me.
Let me say it this way.
Well,
the potions and the powders.
Oh,
are the
absolutely.
period.
It's funny because so that's funny. All right, that's exactly what came up.
Yeah.
Recently.
Interesting.
Someone brought that up recently a couple times. I said the funny thing is I actually did talk about it in part of talking about it because that era was lost friends. People lost family and friends. There was Carlos Vega, and there's so many. Too many to even think about. And we talk about it, and not because I'm not trying to glorify or whatever. When you're cutting a film to 110 minutes to da-da-da-da, or whatever it is, 105, I don't know what it is, 101 minutes, you got to start going, it's not working. There's whole sections that I talk about that didn't make it, like, the drug culture or FM radio or LPs changing the business. I can't go everything. And or people I interviewed. I interviewed John Oates. I interviewed Clint Black. I interviewed Bob Glaub. Now, part of that changed also when COVID hit. Let me finish the drug thing. I pulled out the drug stuff, not because I was pulling it out. It just doesn't fit. It's like a song. That solo doesn't work. It's taken us elsewhere. There was a 7-minute section on drug use on the DVD. They all talk about it. Yeah. Not to glorify it, not at all. I mean, joking some of it, I kind of joke about it that one time when with Russ talks about a lot of things being foggy. And I show, by the way, my favorite shot, it's taking the Linda Ronstadt double album. And there's a picture of, no one sees this unless you know the album. Russ and Waddy are on the album with Linda and everybody else at that hot dog stand. And I'm taking pot with a zigzag, and I'm recreating the zigzag of pot falling down to let the seeds fall. That's how, for those kids out there, we had seeds in our pot. And so when I shot this, I realized, oh shit, bought pot, there's no seeds. I hadn't bought pot in years, and to buy it legally is like, wait a minute. So I had to go to the flower store and get seeds. Oh, that's so funny. So recreate that. But at the same time, I'm thinking, kids don't know. No. They don't. We had seeds in our pot and our watermelon. Think about it. Kids don't know what those black things are in a watermelon. But the drug use is very important. And again, there's a great story of Linda that's not in it because of time. And she goes, we're driving on the bus, and the new driver in Detroit, he goes over the bridge, goes into Canada, into Winnipeg, and goes, oh no, because now they've driven over the bridge. Now they got to turn around and come back through America into customs. All of a sudden, everybody's in a panic, throwing all their drugs out the window. She goes, it was probably thousands of dollars of drugs, probably cocaine and pot or whatever. Linda's pretty straight, but everybody else is throwing their shit out. And she goes, and she's got this fairy outfit on that she got from Bob Glaub's wife at a party once. She goes, I love that. Can I use that? Yeah. So she goes, I'm dressed in that. And she goes to the road manager after, they're about to go over. She goes, let me talk to the customs guy because my brother's a cop in Tucson. I know how to talk to him. And she's got these fairy ears or antennas. And the guy says, no, you're not. Sit down. But,
I love the story that when she goes to the strip club she has no ID and she has to identify herself by singing Blue
that's basically, exactly. Where
so funny.
She goes, what are the guys doing? She goes, and Waddy goes, oh, they all went to the strip club. She goes, I want to go. And he goes, what? All right, let's go. And he walks over. They go crossing highways and this and that to get to the, and then she doesn't have her ID. And the woman says, I need ID. He goes, this is Linda Ronstadt. She goes, I still need an ID. He goes, sing something. She starts singing Blue By, and she goes, all right, fine, come on in.
I love that. You know who burns down the screen that I really enjoyed seeing in this is Steve Jordan.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, I really like his
so
presence. Good. And how in the world did you get Keith Richards to be in your film?
Waddy.
Oh, okay.
Waddy.
Yeah, because he played with them.
Yeah, and it's funny because there's interviews, again, going back to the COVID thing. Most of the artists were done. When I say dumb, when COVID hit, and the panic was like, holy shit, I don't have our guys. I don't have the band. Now what do we do? Everybody's in their 70s. We're all in a panic in the world. And now what do we... So I slowly went out safely and got our band in there. Well, we still need the round table. We still need Don Henley. We'll still need David Crosby. David and Don, I went out personally and shot those with... Steve Jordan, sent those. We sent him questions, and he sent them back by iPhone. And same with Keith Richards.
Yeah.
Those are the only two interviews I didn't interview. But God, they're good.
They're really
and then,
good.
But the other one is like Neil Young. It's like it's an obvious Zoom, and it sucks. But the interview is Neil Young. Is like he's up there. It's like, what's he doing? And I'm interviewing with him. By the way, on the line with him was Nico Bolas, the great engineer, and Al Schmidt, who passed away.
Yeah,
the
Al
great.
was
Yeah,
I guess we loved Al.
Yeah, Al was the best. And and here's Neil Young. I'm thinking, why can't Daryl Hannah shoot this for me?
Yeah.
Because she's got she's a photographer. But Neil's like walking around. It's like he looks like he's in, like the basement of, with his
like the farmer.
He's with a map of the world behind him. It's almost like Dr. Strangelove.
I love it.
So
love it.
But you get what you get.
You do.
And you got to put it in.
Well, if you continue on this trail of documenting these historic things, I'm getting ready for you to interview Lynn drum machines and DX7s for the music of the.
Yeah.
Of the
Well, it's funny because that shot of the DX7 and all and the Lynn drum. I went to my who I've known since high school, Anthony Marinelli. Anthony.
Yeah. Oh, I do. Yeah.
And Anthony was the guy, the synth guy that created all the sounds for Thriller and all that. He's a fabulous guy. And I said, Ant, and he goes, do you have these? He goes, well, my friend has that organ. He goes, we could go do it over there. So we went over there and did all that. And it was, and it's great. I got 2 projects coming. One is Wolfman Jack, which I started. I'm excited about this because I've already started. I interviewed Richard Dreyfuss. I've interviewed Johnny Rivers. And I've had the family are behind it 100%. And they've sent me all these videotapes, VHSs that I'm transferred home stuff. And it is fabulous. I'm seriously so digging it, because he's a real guy. And that's the story it comes back to family again, by the way. I think all of the first 2 films are about family, bonding and taking care of each other. And when I got this project, when it was offered to me, I said, I'm on this one. I said, not realizing, oh my God, he's family. I just knew him like everybody else. Who is this guy? Bob Smith. Well, I want to know who Bob Smith is. It's not, this guy was a personality, a persona. It was not like an actor where he played different parts and you kind of knew this guy. He always was ... So I said, what's he like at home? And that's where I'm getting all these videotapes. He took care of his family. He took care of his crew. He took care of everybody. And always on, it seemed like, always kept that personality on because, that's what people wanted. Yeah. Fabulous guy, though. So I'm excited about that. And the other one is we're talking right now about the next generation players in the late 70s, early 80s.
Oh, great.
In L.A. And that's a sound.
Yeah.
L.A. was broken up in different sections, as we said earlier.
Yeah.
There were different, you had Dad at that point, in the 80s, he's doing film and TV. He's not doing the records anymore. The only time he's doing records is if they needed the classical with the gut string or mandolin or bouzouki or something like that with Garfunkel or Kenny Loggins or something like that. But that world's a whole different world than you had TV world and you had the record world. Sometimes they kind of move over. Some guys did all 3.
Mike Post has a great quote. And said the Wrecking Crew was a time, and that time
Mike
passed.
was part of the end of the Wrecking Crew.
Yeah.
There's that shot, that, I don't know if you see that footage of, it's a Sonny and Cher, but you have in the guitar players, that's Mike Post playing.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah, because Mike he's like he says, he goes, I was like the 5th player, when they needed someone.
So for our listeners, you can see The Immediate Family on video on demand.
Yeah.
On Apple TV.
It's really important to spread the word
on
for
Prime,
us.
Amazon Prime.
All of them.
There you go.
It's on VOD. Rent it, buy it. I don't care however you want to do it. Have a party. These films, they need to be seen. And the only way to say it is just keep recommending them. I always tell people, if you like a movie in these festivals, when I go to these festivals, I said, please tell the filmmaker, tell everybody, tell your friends, tell your family. Everybody's an influencer now. There's 200 people. You tell 5 people, we got over 1,000 people talking,
Good words to say, Denny. We're going to do our part, and thank you for being our guest on Storyophonic. Thank you for listening to Storyophonic. Please follow us and rate us on your favorite listening platforms. Tune in for new shows and check out past episodes. Storyophonic is produced and mixed by Lindsay Tomasic. Our production director is Kim Strand. Our theme music is by Dadalite Mine. And I'm your host, Dan Kimbell.